The year was 1814 and England, though outwardly triumphant after the long shadow of Napoleon, trembled beneath subtler uncertainties, shifts in class, whispers of political reform, and the unsteady pulse of an aristocracy clinging to its fading grandeur. Yet among these vast movements of history, one woman stepped quietly toward her fate, wrapped not in silk or ceremony but in resolve. Lady Eleanor Ashcombe had never belonged to the glittering world that claimed her, though it had shaped her since birth. At nearly 40, she carried herself with a composed intelligence that unsettled society far more than any scandalous affair might have. Though she possessed a beauty that had softened but not vanished with age, it was the depth in her voice, the directness in her gaze, and the stillness she brought to a room that unsettled those who preferred their women ornamental. In parlors and drawing rooms, she was spoken of in the way uncomfortable truths often are, softly, sharply, and always behind her back. Ashcombe Manor, once a vibrant symbol of her family's standing, had begun to sag under the weight of financial decline and unkept promises. Ivy grew thick around the windows, and dust settled on embroidered curtains that had once been a point of pride. Her father, Sir Reginald Ashcombe, paced its dim corridors with the impatience of a man aware his legacy was crumbling. He saw in Eleanor not a daughter but the last unplayed card in a losing game. And so he had arranged her betrothal to the Earl of Roxton, a man older than her father and twice as driven by self-interest. The match promised financial salvation for the family, though none for Eleanor's soul. She had agreed in silence, but her acceptance held no sincerity. She had lived long enough to recognize that silence often passed for obedience, and she had learned how to weaponize it when necessary. Yet as the date of the engagement announcement approached, she felt a tightening in her chest, an acute claustrophobia as though every breath she took was borrowed. She had watched friends and acquaintances bow to such arrangements, resigning their hopes for security. But she had survived too much of life to surrender what was left of her spirit to a man who viewed her as an acquisition. That final night, long after the household had retreated to their chambers, Eleanor stood at her window, watching the moonlight settle over the estate like a thin veil. The air was cold, the kind that made choices seem sharper. She could almost hear the future calling to her, not in a shout but in a persistent whisper. Leave. Go. Claim the remainder of your years before they are lost to someone else's design. And so she had spent hours packing a small trunk, only what she could carry without attracting suspicion. A change of clothes, a few letters from her late mother, her favorite book of poetry, and enough coins to reach the distant cousin who had offered her shelter years ago. Before dawn, she moved through the manor with the caution of a thief, though it was her own life she was stealing back. The dying embers in the hearth cast a faint amber glow across the hall, illuminating portraits of ancestors who had judged her since childhood. She refused to meet their painted eyes. At the door, she hesitated only once, pressing her palm to the cool brass handle. She felt a brief pang, guilt, perhaps, or fear, but it dissolved beneath a steadier emotion, determination. The morning was wrapped in mist so thick it blurred the edges of the world, turning the familiar into the unknown. It suited her purpose well. Her small hired carriage waited beneath the crooked oak that marked the estate's boundary. The coachman, bribed the previous afternoon, tipped his hat without speaking. She climbed inside, heart pounding, though her expression remained calm. As the wheels rolled forward, carrying her away from the life that had confined her, Eleanor felt an unexpected ache, grief not for the house she left behind, but for the years spent trying to please those who never truly saw her. She leaned back, letting the rhythm of the carriage steady her breathing. The mist drifted across the fields like ghosts, erasing her tracks. It was as though the earth itself conspired to protect her escape. But as they approached the wrought iron gate at the end of the long drive, a sound broke through the quiet. Hoofbeats, measured, firm, deliberate. The coachman stiffened, pulling the reins instinctively. Eleanor's pulse fluttered. For a moment she thought the Earl had discovered her plans and sent someone to retrieve her. She drew the curtain aside, bracing herself. A lone horseman materialized from the fog like an apparition summoned by fate. His posture was upright, his presence commanding yet strangely composed. As he drew nearer, she recognized the silhouette, a tall figure with broad shoulders, a bearing shaped not by vanity but by discipline. The Duke of Harland. She had known him in the distant, polite way society dictated, exchanging nods at balls, brief conversations at charity gatherings, never anything more. He had returned only recently from the Napoleonic campaigns, his name spoken with reverence across Europe. Women adored him, men envied him, and England praised him as its quiet hero. Yet he had always seemed untouched by the flattery that followed him. Reserved, observant, mysterious. She stepped from the carriage before the coachman could protest. The cold air stung her cheeks as she faced him. His horse halted with a low snort, its breath mingling with the fog. "Your Grace," she said, her voice steady though confusion churned within her. "This is an odd hour for a ride." He removed his gloves slowly, deliberately, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity she had never seen directed at her before. "Lady Eleanor," he answered, his voice low, textured by exhaustion and something deeper. "Forgive me, but I could not allow you to leave without offering you my protection." Her breath caught. "You know then?" "I know you are fleeing a future you do not deserve," he replied gently. "And I know that if you pass through those gates alone, the world will not be kind to you." There was no accusation in his tone, only quiet resolve. The mist thickened around them, as though the morning itself suspended its breath to witness the moment. Eleanor lifted her chin, refusing to waver. "Why are you here, Your Grace?" He hesitated, not from uncertainty but from the weight of a truth long buried. "Because," he said, the words almost a confession, "I could not let you vanish from my sight without finally standing at your side." And though she did not yet know what he truly meant, she felt the world shift, subtle, irrevocable, as though her destiny had been waiting at this gate all along. The silence between Eleanor and the Duke stretched as the mist curled around them, forming a pale shroud that seemed to seal them away from the rest of the waking world. She studied him, searching for any trace of condescension or presumption, yet found only an earnestness that unsettled her far more than any reproach would have. His presence alone carried weight, but his quiet devotion, unspoken yet palpable, pressed against her defenses. She felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself in years, the sensation of being seen. "You should not involve yourself in matters that carry consequence," she murmured, stepping back as though distance might restore the boundary he had so effortlessly crossed. His gaze did not waver. "Some consequences are worth bearing." She turned slightly, enough to hide the tremor in her fingers. The Duke of Harland had always moved through society with a certain remote dignity, like a man who had seen too much to pretend frivolity mattered. Rumors whispered that the war had carved into him wounds deeper than the medals on his uniform suggested. But Eleanor had dismissed such talk as the usual embellishments around a celebrated figure. Now, standing before him, she sensed that the truth held far more gravity. He dismounted with practiced ease and approached her carriage, his boots sinking softly into the damp earth. "Your coachman fears pursuit," he said quietly. "He informed me when I stopped him. He believes the Earl's men may already be searching." The words landed like cold rain. Eleanor had anticipated urgency, not immediate danger. "I intended only to reach the main road," she replied, unable to hide the strain tightening her throat. "From there, I would secure another transport." "Alone?" His voice softened. "Eleanor, that route exposes you to far more than scandal." She stiffened at the use of her first name, though it slipped from him with such care that she could not summon outrage. "I have survived alone for much of my life," she said, trying to reclaim command of the moment. "This is no different." "It is entirely different," he answered, quieter still. "Your intended is a man who acquires what he desires and destroys what he cannot. You know this. You know what he will do to force compliance." She closed her eyes briefly, acknowledging the truth she had tried to outrun. The Earl of Roxton demanded obedience with the same chill precision he used to manage his estate accounts. Her refusal would bruise not his pride but his influence, an injury he would not tolerate. The Duke stepped closer, his voice steady but edged with urgency. "You need protection until you reach safety. Allow me to escort you to the coaching in 2 hours south. We will change horses, alter your direction and conceal your path. After that, you may send me away if you wish." His offer was reasonable, carefully measured, yet it carried an undertone she could not decipher. Gratitude warred with caution inside her. She had built her independence out of necessity, piece by piece, and accepting salvation from a man, especially one like him, felt perilously close to surrender. She met his eyes fully for the first time. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Truly." The question seemed to strike him deeper than she intended. He drew a slow breath, as though steadying memories that did not release easily. "Because I have watched you endure a life that should have broken you," he said. "Because I have seen you dismissed, belittled, overlooked, and yet you carry yourself with more dignity than any woman I have ever known. And because I have been a coward far too long." Her heart lurched. "Coward?" "In remaining silent," he replied, his gaze never leaving hers. "In admiring you from a distance when I should have stood beside you. In believing society's judgments over my own instincts." He paused, and the next words left him with painful honesty. I returned from war with little patience for pretending. I will not pretend now. Eleanor felt the ground tilt beneath her. She had known admiration before, fleeting, conditional, always tied to youth or beauty. But this was different. His words did not flatter, they recognized. And recognition was far more dangerous. The coachman cleared his throat anxiously, glancing down the misted road as if expecting shadows to materialize into pursuers. The Duke stepped back, giving her space. The choice remains yours, he said. I will not force your hand. But time is not our ally. She looked at the gate, the path beyond it fading into pale uncertainty. The world outside the estate promised freedom but also peril. Alone she might vanish into oblivion. With him she risked something even more frightening, the possibility of hope. Very well, she said at last, her voice steady. You may accompany us to the coaching inn. Beyond that, I make no promises. His expression softened, relief veiled beneath restraint. He helped her step into the carriage, his hand warm against her gloved fingers. When he mounted his horse and signaled for the coachman to proceed, Eleanor felt a peculiar sensation unfurl in her chest, as if she were crossing not merely a boundary but a threshold. The journey unfolded through narrow lanes where the mist thinned enough to reveal hedgerows glistening with dew. The Duke rode alongside the carriage, attentive yet unintrusive. Occasionally he glanced toward her window, and she found herself studying the quiet fortitude in his features. He moved like a man accustomed to danger, yet his presence exuded a calm that eased her tension. An hour passed before she called out for the carriage to slow. The Duke immediately drew closer. Is something amiss? She hesitated, unsure how to voice the question troubling her. You said you admired me, she began. For what reason? We have scarcely spoken more than pleasantries. He approached the open window, lowering his voice. Because your silence is not the silence of surrender, he said. It is the silence of a woman who thinks deeply, feels fully, and refuses to waste words on those unworthy of them. And because in London years ago, you defended a maid accused of theft when every other lady in the room called for dismissal. You stood alone. I never forgot. Memory surged, her face flushing with the vivid recollection of that moment she had long buried. She had acted instinctively, yet the incident had cost her social favor for an entire season. You remember that? She whispered. I remember all of it, he replied. Emotion pressed against her ribs, unfamiliar and disarming. But before she could speak, a distant sound cut through the quiet, a rider approaching fast. The Duke's expression sharpened. Stay inside, he ordered gently, positioning his horse before the carriage. The moment hung suspended, taut with danger and possibility. And Eleanor understood, with a clarity that stole her breath, that her escape had only just begun. The rider emerged from the thinning mist with the urgency of a man carrying unwelcome news. His horse's hooves struck the ground in sharp, uneven beats, echoing across the quiet fields. Eleanor gripped the window frame as the Duke placed himself squarely in the path of the approaching figure, every line of his posture shifting into vigilance. The rider slowed only when he recognized whom he faced. At the sight of the Duke of Harland, he pulled the reins sharply and dipped his head. Your Grace, the man said breathlessly. I bring word from Ashcombe Manor. The Earl of Roxton knows Lady Eleanor fled before dawn. He has dispatched men along the southern road. Eleanor felt her chest tighten, though she forced herself to remain still. The Duke's expression did not waver, but a subtle tension gathered along his jaw. How many? He asked. 4 riders at least, the man replied. Armed. Determined. The Duke nodded once, dismissing the rider with a composed authority that brooked no debate. As the messenger galloped away, the Duke turned to Eleanor, his eyes unwavering. We must leave the main road, he said. Following it will only ensure we cross paths with them. Then where? She asked, aware that her voice carried both fear and something perilously close to trust. There is a disused chapel west of here, he replied. It stands beyond the willow fields. If we reach it, we can take the forest route to the next town. It will slow us, but it will hide us. The coachman looked uneasy, but Eleanor leaned forward. Do as he says. They veered from the road onto a narrow track, the carriage jolting over uneven earth. Branches brushed the sides like fingers, and sunlight struggled through the canopy, scattering faint gold across the path. Eleanor clung to the seat as the Duke rode beside them, always close enough that she could sense his presence even when she could not see him. Time stretched thin, threaded with both fear and anticipation. The farther they traveled, the more distant the world they'd left behind seemed. Ashcombe Manor with its expectations, the Earl with his demands, the gossiping society that had belittled her for years. Each turn of the wheel carried her into an unknown future, yet for the first time she did not recoil from uncertainty. The abandoned chapel appeared at the crest of a hill, its stone walls weathered, its roof sagging but still intact. Sunlight fell across it like a blessing withheld for decades. The carriage drew to a stop, and Eleanor stepped onto the ground, breathing deeply. The air felt different here, brisk, unburdened, almost expectant. The Duke approached her, his horse trailing behind. "We can rest briefly," he said. "But not long." She nodded, though her gaze drifted to the chapel's doorway. Something about it, its quiet ruin, its lingering dignity, mirrored her own life. She walked toward it, pushing aside the wooden door that groaned in protest. Inside, dust floated in thick, gentle spirals through the slanted beams of light. Broken pews leaned against the walls, and wildflowers had forced their way through cracks in the stone. The silence was profound, untouched by the world's ambitions. Eleanor felt the weight of her years lift slightly, replaced by a cautious sense of reclamation. When the Duke entered, she did not turn immediately. She sensed him behind her, his presence grounding, steady. "This place has seen better days," she murmured. "So have many of us," he replied softly. She faced him then, and he stepped closer, though he maintained enough distance that she felt no intrusion. His eyes held the same quiet depth she remembered from London, the look of a man who listened long before he spoke. "You did not need to follow me this far," she said. "You owe me nothing." He shook his head. "I owe you honesty. Something long overdue." Her breath caught, but she remained silent, allowing him the space he sought. "I spent years convinced that admiration was a weakness," he said. "War teaches a man to guard every emotion. But what I felt for you never faded. It only grew stronger with time." He paused, searching her face. "When I returned from the front, I found England unchanged, but I was not. I could no longer pretend indifference when my heart had never felt it." Eleanor felt the truth of his words resonate deeply, unsettling a part of her she had sealed away. "I am not the woman society expects men like you to desire," she said quietly. "I am older, less malleable, too accustomed to my own mind." "That is precisely why I desire you," he answered. "Because you do not bend to please. Because you see the world with a clarity that humbles those around you. Because your strength is not loud but enduring. And because," his voice softened, "you live with a courage I have admired for years." The words settled between them, a fragile offering shaped from years of restraint. Eleanor felt a tremor in her chest, not of fear but of recognition. She had been admired before, fleetingly, insincerely, but never like this, never for the parts of her she had fought to protect. Outside, the wind rustled through the willow fields, a quiet reminder that the world still hunted them. Yet the chapel felt suspended in time, granting them a moment untouched by pursuit. "I cannot promise a simple life," he continued. "If you choose freedom, I will guard it. If you choose scandal, I will bear it beside you. But what I will not accept is watching you return to a fate you do not want." Eleanor's pulse quickened. "And if I choose neither? If I choose myself alone? Then I will respect you," he said, "but I will grieve you." Her breath shuddered. She looked away briefly, gathering herself. When she met his eyes again, her voice was steady. "You ask for honesty. Then hear mine. I am frightened. Not of the Earl, not of society, but of wanting something I may not be able to keep." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Then let us want it together," he whispered. "Not as escape but as choice." For a heartbeat, the world stilled. Eleanor felt the years of dismissal, doubt, and quiet ache shift inside her, making space for something unfamiliar, something tender and fierce. Before she could speak, the distant sound of hooves cracked the stillness. The Duke reached for his sword. "They found us." Eleanor straightened, fear replaced by resolve. "Then let them see me choose." And as they stepped into the fading light, the fragile promise between them burned brighter than the danger closing in.